have Fiona Fennell. Now, Fiona Fennell is going to talk about how to achieve career resilience. It's called a Protean approach. I'm fascinated to know what this is. Fiona, it's lovely to have you along today. You can hear us
Nice
loud and
to
clear,
see
can
you.
you?
Nice to see you, Ruth. I met you down at the Cork Expo a few years ago, and we had a
That's
great
right.
old laugh. I remember you
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
So yeah, well done on taking on the task of presenting in these difficult settings.
Oh, sure.
Fair
Look,
play to you, you're doing well.
it's okay. There's a team behind, a masked up team behind as well. Look, I'll
Yeah.
let you take to the virtual stage if you're
Brilliant.
happy to.
I will do.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
absolutely.
listen. Here it is, Fiona Fennell, with Think4Purpose. Thanks, Fiona. I leave you to it.
Thank you. Nice to be here. And I suppose I'm not sure actually myself how to pronounce protein. It could be protein or protean, either. But if the word kind of rings a bell, it's possibly because people are familiar with prototype, and it does relate to prototype because there's an element of design and systems thinking in it. So yeah, you can correct me, Ruth, on the pronunciation another time. So my background and the reason I look at our careers from a systems point of view is because mainly I've been career coaching STEM professionals, so scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians for, we'll say, 20 years, back when there was only black and white photos available of us. Maybe even I'm only going to admit to 20 years. But the last 5 years or so, I have been purpose training people, particularly STEM engineers, using problem-based learning for quality and validation jobs in the pharmaceutical sector. And just answering that question from your last gentleman who was asking about, is age an issue? You know, I would have trained a lot of people from company backgrounds such as electronic engineering into the pharmaceutical sector. Age certainly did not in any way impair people's careers, even in joining a new industry for the first time in their 40s and 50s, in my experience. But mindset is particularly important, because when you're shifting from one industry to another, you have to achieve a mindset change, possibly from just-in-time thinking to just-in-case thinking. And that's effectively what I do. Probably career coaching is about 10% of my time spent these days. Mainly I'm working with teams of people to train them on critical, collective, and systems thinking. But I'm always interested in how do we improve performance and how do we improve competencies, particularly for engineering and pharmaceutical sectors. And how we do that is by understanding that there's a definite link between cognition, experience, and learning. And by cognition, I suppose I'll simplify that by saying our mindsets and our beliefs impact how we integrate our experience with our learning, and in that way drive our careers forward. And I suppose careers are changing, and they're changing directly in response to the fact that industry is changing. As technology has driven and advanced us towards more specialisms, it's becoming more and more important that we can think in an integrative way, that we train people interprofessionally, and that different technical disciplines, but any disciplines, can speak to each other in the same language. And that's actually getting harder because the specialisms, as I say, are driving people down quite narrow, I suppose, narrowly focused careers sometimes into areas, you know, you can have an entire career on one cell type at this stage. So the workplace is changing. We're going to be far more dependent on networks of people working to make multi-stakeholder decisions rather than individual contributors achieving the big breakthroughs. It would much more likely to be interdisciplinary teams. We still will have hierarchical systems, obviously, and hierarchical systems are good because they give us role clarity, which makes it easier to work. But more and more, the big problems will be tackled by, as I said, interdisciplinary teams, ideally. So from a mindset point of view, in a way, what we're doing is we're evolving how we think too. We can't rely on one thinking habit anymore. I'll explain later how people can either think like hedgehogs or think like foxes. I'm going to use a few nature metaphors along the way because they explain a lot more than we can do in images than we can with words. And equally, if I was representing careers, they look different also. Careers in a way are, you know, moving away from being steady, same size steps up a career ladder, and are far more now like a tree where you have a root basis of knowledge structures that you're pulling from and growing from. And now more and more what we're seeing is the structure is changing the behaviors. So careers are changing. A lot of the same good principles will apply, but we need to take that on board. So what I try and do is help people to apply good critical thinking skills to their careers and also to other aspects of their work. And from a careers point of view, The same 5 big enemies of critical thinking skills will apply as much in the career context as they do in a work context. And they are hasty moral judgment, particularly about ourselves, deciding we're good or bad at certain things. Black and white thinking, for example, all or nothingness. We do badly in one interview and we think, okay, that's not good at interviewing. Be nice. We're all a little bit change averse. So as much as we like to learn, learning actually does incur some discomfort, and none of us like to be uncomfortable if we can avoid it. So we need to sometimes look at our entire learning mindset, and is that a growth or a fixed mindset? And, you know, be honest with ourselves. At times we may need to change our mindset around learning and change our mindsets around receiving and seeking feedback, for example. Often we depend on our managers to set the tone and the direction for our careers. We can do that less and less as time goes on. And sometimes we label ourselves, okay? And the biggest way we label ourselves, I suppose, is from the point of view of what we believe we're capable of. And, you know, I think one of your previous speakers was speaking about imposter syndrome. And yeah, that's a label we sometimes give ourselves at a particular time and place. So we'll look at making sure that at least if we are labeling ourselves, those labels actually reflect reality, but they sometimes don't. So where do we start? Well, often what we find is people only really see clarity within their careers through the rear view mirror. And we need to avoid that if we can, because obviously then you may have missed out on an opportunity, or you may, you know, get a reflection, but a little bit too late for it to be useful to you. So my 3 little superheroes down the bottom here. Number 1, I have Mark Twain. And the reason I have Mark Twain is because one of the best things we can do for our careers, and particularly when we're preparing for interview, is be very clear on what we know and very clear on what we don't know. And it was Mark Twain who said, it's not what we don't know that we should be worried about, it's what we do know, but just ain't so. And one of the things we need to know very well and have good self-awareness about is ourselves, obviously. So, you know, one good way of doing that is to take a Dolly Parton approach, which is to get to know yourself on purpose. So how do we do that? And one of the ways we can do it is we can use a set of tools given to us by no one else less than Socrates himself. We can ask questions. So the 3 main ways that we can develop our career as well is asking ourselves questions, or having a coach ask us questions that no one's asked us before, by self-reflection and introspection and getting to know ourselves by observing our own behaviors, and also by dialogue. You know, the nice thing about coaching and mentoring, and they are different, and I'll talk about that later, is that sometimes we gain insights just in talking to another person that we wouldn't have gained for, you know, hours of introspection. And a conversation can be very creative, and it can be very learningful if we know how to have those type of conversations. And also, I think it's worth just giving you the tip that at the end of the day, an interview is just a conversation too, but it's a conversation with a purpose, which brings me back to a Protean career and a systems approach. Systems, I suppose, have 3 things that set them apart. Number 1, they have a set of elements that are irreducible in some way. Number 2, the interrelationships between those elements are particularly important for the outputs or what is actually produced. But most of all, a system has a purpose or function, and most systems are very good at doing what they're designed to do. So a Protean career is designed to help you explore and discover, not to set a very distinct destination, but to help you to realize how you can self-propel your career. It's also very adaptive. So Proteus actually was a Greek mythological figure, and he was famous for, number 1, being able to shape shift according to how the environment changed, and number 2, to be able to see into the future. Now, no one can see into the future, and I'm not going to say that I can do that for anyone either. But from a shape-shifting point of view, you know, that is necessary now, because we're in a very different environment from the point of view that we're all feeling at the same time something called VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if we don't cope with that and actually have careers that can handle complexity, well, then they simply won't do what we want them to do. So what drives behavior from a systems point of view is generally structures, and the structures of careers are changing. And we all would like to think it could be as linear as we take steady steps up a ladder within a department and we get to the top of the department and maybe even we go higher, but that we can see ahead very clearly and that we're going in one direction at all times. When in actual fact, careers today are much more reflective of the right-hand side. The lateral moves that we make may be much more important than the forward moves. And I suppose one of the things that we're seeing is people find new careers through yes, they're existing jobs, but actually developing skills like project management methodologies and application of those skills, because project management then opens up a different career direction for people almost into any sector. So, there are particular skills that open up new paths to us. So how do we design a career like a system? First, we have a clear purpose to begin with. Okay, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. That's up to every individual to decide what their priorities are. We need to be very aware of, what are our thresholds and what are our preferences. We all have limitations, and they're not necessarily a problem if we know how to manage them. We also need to create a supportive environment for ourselves, and we need to have buddies who are going to keep us honest and keep us, I suppose, walking the talk. We need to be able to spot errors, and sometimes that's around things like self-limiting beliefs. So I'll talk about those. And we need to understand where are the very subtle and nuanced feedback loops. Any system has balancing feedback loops and also reinforcing feedback loops. So we need to put some new ones in place, or need to understand how some of them might be putting us out of our equilibrium. But mainly what we need to do is, maintain our integrity. And I've often written about St. Bridget, first from the point of view that I think she should be the patron saint of systems thinking and systems thinkers in Ireland. So if you want to read about my suggestions for that, have a look at my blog on think4purpose.com. But what I like, I suppose, about a systems approach is it's very natural, but it's also very industrious. And what it does is it allows us to sometimes create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So let's, have a look at what we're trying to do from a purpose point of view. This was a research assignment that I took on last year, and I went out to a lot of STEM managers, and a lot of them were saying, okay, yes, we do need technical content knowledge, but actually above that, we need very good contextual and situational awareness in people. And we need people who can work well with others, and we need people who can assess risk and also pivot between different ways of thinking, because different problems demand different thinking strategies, and we need people who are aware of that and can switch gear and join the dots for us. So these are the elements of it designing. From a very simple systems point of view, this is our lowest level of the system, I suppose, in that what I've done here is map out what a particular career might look like. And this is level one. So obviously we have hard skills and soft skills, but more and more we'll hear people talking about transversal skills. And they're the skills that transfer well between different jobs and between different tasks. We have certain thinking habits. We'll talk about those later. We obviously all are coming at things from an education point of view, but education is less able in one sense to prepare us for the type of problems we're going to meet in industry, because we're going to be dealing with more novel problems. And the difference between education and industry is that education gives you the lesson first and the test after, whereas industry gives you the test first a lot of the time and the lessons after. So we need to get better at mapping the knowledge that we have and integrating that well between different tasks and between possibly college and industry, and understanding where the connections are. I'm going to talk about mental models because sometimes they can hold us back, particularly mental models that we have and beliefs that we have about what careers should look like versus what they are. We also need to be aware that something called self-concept is important. So our own levels of self-awareness, both internally and externally, and also what we believe we're capable of. As Henry Ford said, whether we believe we can or believe we can't, we're right. Okay, so it determines a lot. So these are, I suppose, when I talk about monitoring, detecting errors, often those come from pre-assumptions people have. And also it's useful to map those out. So in the coaching that I do, we have conversations where we try and figure out, are there self-limiting beliefs that are holding me back that I'm not even aware of? And it's only through conversation that we start to pull those out. Some people believe I'm only average is a bad thing, when actually, if you're average from a psychological point of view, it means the world is optimized for you and you're possibly easier to manage, which is a very good thing, in fact. So being average is not actually a disadvantage, it's a big advantage, but only if you realize why, and only if you understand that it can actually be your strength. So again, building people's self-awareness is often done through active conversations with other people. And we need to be brave and look to see, are there assumptions, that I need to be testing out here? Does reality back them up? Or are they just assumptions I've inherited from my own very simplified version of what careers should look like, or things I picked up from my family, etc.? Because these are the interrelationships that really matter. It's all of these elements influencing one another. So this is building up our model a little bit. And for each person, this is different. But if you can imagine that there are feedback loops between all of these elements, and they all matter. I've mentioned VUCA already. The media also sets, very clear expectations of what success should look like, when actually that may not be what we want as individuals. Our peers have a big influence, and they are probably our most important social learning. Still learn a lot from one another at work. But we sometimes have funny expectations from the point of view, for instance, mentoring. If we think that a mentor is doing us a favor, we should remember that actually they're not. We are as much doing the mentor the favor as the opposite way around. Because what mentoring is, I suppose, what a mentor will get from a relationship with you, if they're your mentor, is that you'll be bringing a beginner's mind into their job space as well. So, for example, you'll be helping them to test their assumptions so that they're clear on what they know and they don't know. So it's a very equal relationship. And it's very good if we can look at having peer relationships and mentoring relationships that also have a bit of variety to them. So, for example, you might choose a mentor in a different department altogether, but someone who has the same learning goals as yourself. Or you might decide that one of your peers is someone who has a very different take on work than you do, but you both have the same accountabilities, and you may become accountability buddies. So you just look at, on a monthly basis, maybe how well are we meeting up to our different accountabilities. And because we look at things slightly differently, can we give different approaches to one another that could work? And as the previous speaker said, sometimes it is about trying things out and experimenting, okay? And again, we can't expect too much of our employers. It's not up to our employer to define a career path for us. It's actually up for us at the different stages in our career to decide what we want to do and what we're trying to achieve. So I use a whiteboard called Miro so that I can share ideas and I can give problem-based exercises to people that I coach. And also sometimes people do these together. And this is an example of one of my little pieces from the Miro board. And what I'm basically using here is a metaphor from Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon was both a philosopher and really the father of modern science and empiricism. And he suggested that we have three different types of workers. We have ants, spiders, and bees. And, at these different stages, I've decided to apply these to the different stages in careers. So at the beginning of your career, you're at the ant stage. And mainly what you want to do here is differentiate your skills. So you want to develop a set of skills, become competent in your area, but then understand, well, where are the unique advantages I now have with those skills? And be more than happy to move sector, by the way, to where the advantage can be most capitalized on. Then when you get to the spider stage, you're probably developing knowledge structures that other people work off. And you're possibly working as an individual contributor and becoming quite an expert in your own area. But at that point, then you've already achieved independence. You need to become good at managing interdependencies between different departments and between different knowledge sets and between different people. So you need to be good at spotting your own knowledge gaps, for example, and overcoming those. And later in your career, you become more of a worker bee. Okay, you can achieve very much so a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. If we think about the bee, even how the bee collects his raw materials and information, it does it in a way that cross-pollinates flowers and cross-pollinates ideas with other people. So you're now in the knowledge creation area, and you're beginning to understand the philosophies behind things like lean methodologies and Shingo, etc., so that you can pass those on to other people. So the more we develop in our careers, actually, the more dependent our careers become on other people. We'll see more and more that there are managers managing staff who are far more technically specialized than them. So the main actual task that the manager has is to make sure that people can see the wood from the trees, for example, and to bring a bird's eye view or a bee's eye view onto proceedings so that people can work together better. So again, by knowledge mapping, here's my own knowledge map. So rather than a CV these days, I try and remind myself, what is my sphere of knowledge? Where are the gaps? And where are there interconnections that I'm maybe not spotting that I should be, so that I can pass on what I know to others and I can close any gaps. So for instance, recently I've signed up to a data science course because I realized with Work 4.0, I'm preparing engineers and scientists for an area that I need to be more familiar with, the types of models that will be applied, for instance, to manage risk and uncertainty, so that I can help them to apply new models. So here's my last model for what a career could look like. And again, it's taking on board all the new technologies that are coming into bear, so that, you know, we don't exist in a vacuum. Okay, we need to understand, looking outside ourselves, that industry is demanding new competencies, but we won't understand, you know, how we can meet those demands and have a satisfied career unless, you know, we get a bit sophisticated too. And again, this isn't that particularly complicated, but it's understanding how it affects you. You are the most complex and adaptive self-organizing system that you're ever going to manage, no matter what industry you work in. So really your task is to understand yourself and make the most of your learning opportunities. And remember, it's not always easy to see what we've learned and what we haven't learned, but and that's called unconscious competence. You know, sometimes we know what we know and sometimes we don't. And when we become very good at something, it's almost like we're doing it on autopilot. So it's very healthy if we can go back and, you know, have somebody question us, question ourselves, and make sure that we get back to a point where we're consciously competent of our skills and attitudes are. So here's my 4 do's, because I see I'm running out of time. Number 1 is take time to digest what you've learned. Integrate the knowledge content with the knowledge context. And make sure that you ask yourself questions and reflect honestly and very regularly. Differentiate yourself. Understand what makes you you, because you are innately resilient. But understand how the different knowledge sets and skills that you have can be applied in different ways. And as your career develops, look at multi-tracking your career. You know, not just following one particular path, but opening up another path that's maybe adjacent to that and developing yourself in that direction too. So the 4 main pillars that you need are curiosity. So don't just know, you know, how curious you are, know how exactly you're curious. There are many different types of curiosity. For instance, scientists exercise a kind of a free range curiosity, and engineers more an applied curiosity. Have a growth mindset also, and have empathy for other people. Assume positive intent. Look for feedback and really treasure negative feedback, because the people who are honest enough to give you that are probably giving you the biggest gift they could. And from a balance point of view, understand your own limitations, even from a physical point of view. Know well how many hours sleep you need, how often you need to eat, how regularly you need to take breaks, and manage those thresholds well, because at the end of the day, we are still a finite resource that needs to be managed. So I don't think I'm going to get through all my presentation. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip down, but these are 3 books I very much recommend to any of you who are STEM professionals who are listening in today. Number 1 is Thinking in Systems, because systems thinking can be applied very positively and effectively to almost to anything, including careers. The growth mindset, because we may not always realize that we don't have a growth mindset. For instance, I myself, even as an educator, took me a few years to realize I still had a fixed mindset at times. I'm a little bit Irish in the sense that I was used to hearing my mum say things like, sure, don't mind your woman down below, they've brains to burn in that house. It doesn't matter how hard they work, they're going to do well. Actual fact, that's not a growth mindset. A growth mindset is where we realize, you know, how much we have to learn and that we don't have to know everything. We don't have to get everything right all the time. We should be making mistakes. In fact, we learn more the more wrong answers we come up with on the road to getting the right answer. And then the last book I'd recommend is Range, because we all need to, you know, have better collective, critical, and systems thinking skills to be good generalists these days in a much more complex world. So I really wish you the best of luck. Thank you for the opportunity today. Look up think4purpose.com. And if any of the ideas appeal to you, please come back and talk to me. And good luck with the rest of the speakers. And thanks for having me along, Cormac.
Fiona, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to get to hear you speak again. And I love how you managed to have ants, spiders, bees, Dolly Parton, Mark Twain, and St. Bridget all in the one presentation.
A cast of thousands, Ruth.
A cast of thousands. And very, I suppose, very pertinent that we must realize it's not up to our employers to map our careers. So we need to be quite proactive in that regard. A lot of great information there. The idea of the ability to handle complex issues, our peers in our workplace has been so important. And an interest, one that I never thought of before, you talked about, it was a very fresh way I thought of looking at the relationship between a mentor and a mentee. And that was really interesting.
Lorraine neuroscience. Sorry, there's a lot of neuroscience studies to back that up now, actually. Yeah, if a mentor doesn't go into the relationship looking at it as an equal relationship, then actually from a neurochemical point of view, they limit their own learning. So we have something called testosterone. And if you go in to think, I'm in here to give this person information rather than enabling learning, then the testosterone gets in the way. So yeah, it should be seen as a mutually learning opportunity.
That is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for that. It was a real
My
pleasure
pleasure.
to get to hear you speak again, and hopefully we'll meet again, maybe even in real life sometime in the
Absolutely. Would
future.
love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Would love
a
that.
real pleasure. Thank you so much, Fiona
Thanks,
Fennell.
Ruth.